Blanche Monnier was 25 years old when this story took place. She lived in the French city of Poitiers with her family. Blanche was a very attractive woman and belonged to the French aristocracy of the late 19th century. Her father had been the dean of the Faculty of Letters at Poitiers, and her brother, in addition to participating in various societies and charitable works, had served as the sub-prefect of Poitiers. In 1876, Blanche met who she considered to be the love of her life. He was a lawyer older than her, but who was mired in poverty. Blanche wanted to marry him. The problem was that her mother did not approve. A man who Louise described as a person without a penny was not suitable for a young woman of the aristocracy. And one day Blanche disappeared without a trace. Her parents made up any kind of excuse to get rid of the neighbors' questions, who were obviously worried about what was going on. Not that they wanted to stop the rumors that she had left and simply over time decided to let people forget about the existence of their daughter. The young girl had simply disappeared. Sometime later, Blanche's mother began to give explanations to those who kept asking for them, obviously worried. She said that Blanche had gone mad, that she had a mental illness, but they didn't want to admit her to the psychiatric hospital. Instead, according to her, Blanche was at the family home with all her needs being met. The reality, however, was another very different. At one point, a voice could be heard through one of the house's windows. A neighbor of the family began to try to pay attention to what that voice was saying. She said that she had been locked up without reason. She was worried and also thinking about how she would get out of that place. So, finding the situation strange, this neighbor goes to the door of the house and asks Louise whose voice it was. He told her it was his daughter and that her mental state had declined so much that she was imagining things, like she was a prisoner. Soon after, the window was completely closed so that no one could hear Blanche complain again. In 1885, the man Blanche wanted to marry died. By then, Blanche's mother, Louise, was mourning the terrible death of her daughter, apparently due to her mental state. At least that's what she told everyone. But everything changed when on May 23, 1901, 25 years after Blanche's disappearance, a Paris prosecutor received a letter with chilling details that were even hard to believe. The letter was anonymous, it had no signature, and it didn't say how it knew these details. But it mentioned the following. Mr. Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of a matter of exceptional gravity. It's about a young lady who is locked up in Mrs. Monnier's house, deprived of food, who has lived on rotten garbage for the last 25 years, that is, her own waste. In fact, this letter had been written by one of the maids of the house, a new girl who had recently arrived, replacing the previous one. She arrived and saw the state in which Blanche was, where she was living, what was happening to her, the room in which they kept her locked up, and decided to notify the authorities. The Monnier family had an excellent reputation. Louise Monnier, Blanche's mother, was a widow. She was 75 years old, and thanks to her work in the city, she had received an award from the Good Deeds Committee. Next to the mother's house lived the brother Marcel, also considered an active and valuable member of society. Skeptical of this complaint, the prosecutor decided to send the central commissioner, a man named Boucheton. The man would investigate the matter, which they believed to be false. That same day, at 5 in the afternoon, Boucheton, along with other investigators, went to the Monniers' house in Poitiers. While at first they found nothing strange, Louise raised numerous objections when the investigators wanted to enter a room located on the second floor, in the attic. This room, by the way, was quite small, it was not a main one. However, by insisting, they succeeded. As soon as they opened it, they began to perceive a stench that was so foul that Boucheton had to take a step back, while the smell impregnated his nose and throat. The room was incredibly dark, all the windows were closed, and it was not exactly clear what was happening inside. Boucheton walked towards a window that faced the street with the intention of opening it to let the air circulate, but he couldn't. Both the windows and the blinds were closed with chains and padlocks. Above them was a curtain that prevented any ray of light from entering. After trying several times, the commissioner managed to open the window and was finally able to see what was inside the place. In a corner of the room, sitting on a straw bed, there was a naked woman surrounded by excrement, insects, and food scraps. This woman was Blanche. Boucheton described her as a real human skeleton. She was so malnourished that, according to the chronicles of that time, her thighs had shrunk to the size of her wrist and she weighed only 24 kilos. According to the witnesses, when they entered the room, a foul smell arose. The sheets were fused to the mattress and were very dirty. There was a shapeless mass there. She was there, kidnapped, she curled up and refused to show her face. Blanche couldn't communicate. She had spent 25 years locked up in that place without seeing the sunlight, eating leftovers and hardly speaking to anyone. All of this had obviously left strong scars on her psyche. While they tried to dress her to take her to a hospital, she simply didn't respond as a normal person would. She just screamed. Moreover, for a very long time, not a single person stayed with her for too long, so suddenly having so many people in her room worsened the situation. During all that time, she had only seen her family and some servants. Blanche's hair had not been cut during her entire confinement. It seems she couldn't even bathe. That's also why she was called the real Rapunzel. Her nails had also not been cut all this time, and her hands looked like claws. Witnesses detailed that the woman lived in what seemed to be a hell full of leftover food, bird bones, farmyard, and meat. Her body was covered by a crust formed of dirt, and there were bugs everywhere. The neglect was such that she had worms measuring more than 4 centimeters long, lice and cockroaches walking on her body. The humidity in the room was so high that there were fungi growing inside. Due to her physical condition and being extremely weak, she was unable to get up. But with the help of the people who came to rescue her, Blanche managed to go down the stairs and was transported in an ambulance to a health center. On her body, beyond all this, there were no signs of wounds or bruises. The authorities immediately arranged for the arrest of relatives Louise and Marcel. Having discovered her crime and facing the interrogations, Blanche's mother's health deteriorated, and on June 9th at 9:30, she passed away after suffering a heart attack. Before dying, Louis had assured that he loved Blanche so much to the point of sacrificing himself for her, and blamed the state of his daughter on the negligence of the servants because they were entirely to blame for leaving her locked up for 25 years in what seemed like a tower, without contact for 25 years. Marcel was accused of being an accomplice in the kidnapping of his sister, although he defended himself by saying that from a young age, his sister showed signs of brain alteration, which is why they had assigned her a tutor. After his tutor's death, he wanted to take his sister to a hospice, but his mother stopped him. He said, "I cannot be blamed for the crime of forcible confinement." In addition, there was no crime of kidnapping, as many people had access to Blanche's room. They were aware of the issue and her condition, yet they left her there, so it was undoubtedly their fault. On top of all this, it is believed that the young woman had tried to escape because one of the panels in the door of the room in which she was locked could be seen as having been recently repaired. In turn, on the walls of the room, various inscriptions could be read, such as "Freedom, freedom," or "There is a favorite in the house and it's not me. It's very sad to be forced to live and die in a dungeon." Drawings were also found in pencil and ink on the wall, decorations traced with arrows and crosses, which were emblems of suffering. Will I ever see freedom? Will I continue in a dungeon? These questions were on the walls of the room in which Blanche had been locked up, which she had written before completely losing her sanity. So, on May 26th, just 3 days after the liberation, a note was published in one of the most well-known newspapers of that time, designating Blanche as the recluse of Poitiers. French society went crazy with this news. The theory quickly began to circulate that Blanche had been condemned for falling in love with a man who had no fortune. To prevent this relationship, the young woman was locked up in her prison, where she quickly lost her sanity. The trial for Blanche's kidnapping and imprisonment started the next October, with numerous witnesses testifying. In the preliminary investigation, the judge received 160 testimonies from people associated with the Monnier family. There were neighbors who recounted the screams coming from the mansion, and others described Blanche before her confinement. She was sweet, kind, refined, tall, and she had never done anything eccentric, said one of the people who had seen her. Several house employees assured they had direct orders not to open the window of the room. Faced with the insistence on why they hadn't reported it, if they knew all about this, everyone excused themselves in the fear they felt of losing their job. Even a former employee assured that Blanche's madness was due to a desperation of love. The doctors who examined Blanche and testified during the trial had very different views on her situation. While some considered her completely mad and claimed that her madness dated back to her early puberty years, others instead assured that she was not only sane but also careful and reserved. During the trial, Marcel's defense attorney portrayed the brother as a naive and complete idiot. This could clearly be a strategy to remove the blame. He also argued that Blanche was not a victim of violence or abuse. He said there is not even confinement in the legal sense of the word, because it is about whether the act of closing a door behind someone who has no intention of leaving constitutes the criminal act called violence or assault. You can tell me whatever you want or down in the comments, but honestly, it seems like the worst excuse of all to me. While it was determined during the trial that Blanche's now deceased mother was guilty of her kidnapping and confinement, Marcel was considered an accomplice. Despite the fact that it could be true that he had tried to take her to an asylum, in the face of his mother's denial, he accepted the situation and even went to visit his sister in the room where she had been locked up. He was aware of everything that was happening and yet he did nothing. Even more so after having seen her in that state full of waste around, he still did not complain again. Marcel was then sentenced to 15 months in prison. After completing his sentence, he lived his remaining years in a Pyrenees mansion until his death in 1913. Blanche was sent to a psychiatric hospital after all this. Unfortunately, she never managed to recover and also died in 1913. So yes, it's a story quite, not only disturbing but also sad. Very sad because from the beginning, the family locked her up. Regardless of whether she really had any mental problem to deal with, they still locked her up. Moreover, it isn't simply that the door was open and she could leave whenever she wanted. No, they had the windows closed. They had done that on purpose so that no one could hear her talk. She was on the top floor in a remote part in a small room on a straw bed. They didn't even bathe her. This could clearly be because of judging people in the aristocracy that if you had a person who was mentally ill, it was almost a crime, it was a horrible thing for them. While it doesn't change the fact that it was a dehumanizing act with bad outcomes for all, what were your thoughts on this story? Did you know of any case like this? Have you seen something similar? Let me know in the comments. Thanks to my Patreons and channel members for their support. Here's a new video and a recommended one. You can subscribe by clicking on my face and see you in another video. Goodbye.